Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our Slate Summit presentation about digital marketing. It's called Lord of the Pings, Best Practices and Strategies for Tracking Engagement. I will go ahead and start the introductions for the two of us. My name is Ted Magdzinski. I'm the SVP for Partnerships and Integrations here at Carnegie, powered by Underscore. Prior to this role at Carnegie, I had worked at the University of Cincinnati, did a Slate implementation there, as well as Radius and PeopleSoft implementation. And ever since then have worked in the comm side of things, as well as implementations and really building out the kind of best practices and usages in Slate for the schools that we work with as part of Carnegie, powered by Underscore. To give you a little bit of background on kind of who we are and what we do, we essentially started doing what we've kind of been doing in the Slate space since about 2018, working with over 200 Slate partner schools. Again, as I said, kind of starting in communications and working within Slate, bringing search in-house, doing all of that kind of regular work over the period of time, and then moving into integrations, implementations, consultations, trainings, really everything that Slate can do, we really focused on. So we've grown to the point where we now have 55 total employees and over 35 full-time Slate strategists that work with all of our schools. So it's been a significant kind of amount of growth over the past several years. And again, our Slate space usage has dramatically grown since then as well. And I will now hand it over to Vivien to introduce herself.
Thanks, Dad. Hi, everyone. I'm Vivien, and I am the Assistant Director of Digital Marketing at the Asia School of Business, which is based in Malaysia. I'm one of the Slate power users at ASB. We've got a team of 4 power users, and I also work very closely with the admissions marketing team. I've been with ASB for about 5 years now, and we implemented Slate back in 2017, around the time that I started working at ASB. And I am also a GMAC marketing representative. GMAC is the Graduate Management Admissions Council, and I work very closely with them. And the last one is just a fun fact. I graduated from a French business school. So a little bit about the Asia School of Business. We were established in collaboration with the MIT Sloan, and we offer 2 different MBA programs, a Master of Central Banking, as well as a range of executive education programs as well. I'll now hand it back to Ted to get started.
So today we're really going to focus on a couple different aspects of Slate. It really starts with Ping because it's one of those features that we feel is a little underutilized. There's definitely some opportunities there. There's some ways to kind of leverage that in your usage. And really, if you're familiar with the Underscore Carnegie story, last year when we basically merged and joined forces, that was one of the initial kind of charges we were given is Carnegie is such a big player in the digital ad space, and we have so many clients that use Slate as well as have digital ads. How do we get that information out of Slate? Like, how do we use what's available? There's a whole Ping system in there that a lot of schools necessarily aren't using very well or using it very much. And we've seen a lot of that. And so we're going to kind of put together some best practices, some ways that it actually works, and some deliverables as well to take away and be able to use the system a little bit more. So we'll go through, obviously, just a 101, make sure everybody kind of has an understanding or a basic understanding of how Ping actually works, going through the querying of the data and what you can actually get out of it. And then really the meat of my component will be the digital ad conversion and being able to actually show some very interesting data elements that we can have and see how well it actually shows up in Slate and what you can actually do with it. And then Vivien will go over case study information with Asia School of Business, as well as talk about external services, including Google Analytics. So real quick, again, just to kind of get us started on the Ping side of things. What is Ping really? And it's very similar to other web analytics tools. And so if you have some experience in Google Tag Manager, Google Analytics, anything like that, this will be very familiar. It's basically a way to track web traffic, right? So you have a script on the page on your website or on all the Slate pages, and you can actually see how often students are going to the page, what pages they're actually going to, how long they're staying there. And so there's some additional metrics that we're able to acquire in there and see what kind of story does this actually tell, and what are we able to use with the data that we're collecting. And so again, it works very similar, but the advantage is it's in Slate, right? It ties into any of the other query bases you have. And so having your person information or your application information, you can use that and say, what do we want to do with this information to kind of tie it all together and come up with a plan going forward with it. It works a little bit unique in the fact that it logs activity when a person leaves a website. So what that basically gives us is that duration and timestamp, which again, I think is some of the more interesting information that we would get because it does tell a bit of a story and it gives us kind of something to work off of and tells us a little bit more about the behavior of a student, where it's much more than just purely biodemo data that we're actually getting in Slate for students. I will say, and this is one of those things we always kind of recommend, there's a very fine line between cool and creepy. We get a lot of information out of Ping and we can see kind of what students are doing and where they're going and what they're interested in. We never want to make them feel like we're watching them in a weird way. And that's, I think, very important because there's obviously some ways we can kind of tie this into our communications information or our landing pages and be very intentional about what we're showing students, but we never want to give them the impression that we're kind of overstepping our bounds. And it's a very easy thing to do if you get too in the weeds with how we use the data. To kind of give you some rough idea, how does it actually work and what makes it unique? I'm going to go into this a little bit later because I think this is the big part of this, but it has this retroactive matching component to Ping. And so once you have that activated in Slate and you're tracking all this traffic, and what you can see at the bottom is all of these matched and unmatched records that it's tracking, anytime anybody goes to your website or a Slate page, it will pick up that tag and it will start recording those interactions that a person might have. It may not know who they are, but you'll continue to track that information. And so you'll have that running over the extensive period of time. So it can be years that you have this data in there. What Slate can do and what Ping can do is if there is an opportunity to make a match, it will actually retroactively apply that later. So the good thing is you might have a student visiting your website as a sophomore. They don't do anything. 2 years later, they apply. If Slate can make that match, it'll actually include that information earlier. And that's going to be very key as we go over that later when we talk about digital ad conversions. All that is unmatched records can be queried, which I think is also very important. So you talk about IP retargeting campaigns or getting the IP addresses out of Slate, even for students who don't necessarily know who they are. You may have some additional information that you can actually leverage and pull and find some ways to use that. And then again, I already kind of mentioned, the visit duration tells a story that I think is very unique, that we can get some really good information, especially when you talk about, Slate landing pages or the application login, stuff like that, where we can see a little bit more than what a student may give us on the website. There are some challenges to Ping that you need to consider, and I think this is where we run into the biggest conversations with schools we work with. There's no built-in reports. There's no queries that are kind of pre-built, and so with that, there's really no inherent strategy to how to use it. And so a lot of it is more, well, what is the data showing us? What can we pull from it? What does it tell us? And then how do we build our strategy around that? And so, even just here as an example of kind of showing, like, maybe you build a widget dashboard and just show, here's all the queries and reports that are the kinds of reports that we want to show, that we want our counselors to utilize, that we want to have. There is nothing built in on the front end. And so there is some legwork to kind of get it started, that once you turn it on, you get some information, but the bulk of the work we've seen with schools when they work with it is, we'll pull individual user data, we'll look in the timeline, and we'll have very limited sense of what we want to do with it. There are some strategies you can kind of build around, but again, those do have to be built. One other area to consider is forms must be embedded to grab Ping data. And that's a little bit confusing because I think most schools would expect that if a student goes to a form landing page that exists in Slate, that it would automatically track them. That's not the case. It actually does need to be embedded on a website. So the website will actually be doing the tracking. So that's a component of that. The other side of that that's related to the forms is matches aren't guaranteed. And so how does Slate and Ping actually make a match? There's really three key ways that it can make a match to a record in Slate and know who a student is. It's an application login. So that's pretty easy. Once they log into an application, it can start tracking them and know who they are, as well as email opens and email clicks. So there is a login component of that. What wouldn't actually cause a match is the form submission itself. So because anybody can submit a form, you go to a website and you can submit a form on behalf of somebody. It could be a counselor or a parent. That's not actually enough to make a match. So even if you get a student to submit an inquiry form and that's all they do, Slate's not necessarily going to match them unless there's a follow-up campaign that they then open or click an email, obviously move forward at that point. And so there's a little bit more that has to be done to get that. And so typically with Ping records, we're not necessarily seeing that much in obviously search campaigns, or we're not seeing nearly as much in inquiry campaigns. You may get some, so there's obviously going to be some traffic and there's some interactions. But once you get the students at the apply stage or the yield stage or anti-melt, obviously you have a lot more data you can actually work with. That data is also the kind of the crux of this as well, is that the data volume can get very large, especially when you go into the Ping query base, that in the configurable joins base, you may have millions and millions and millions of records. So if you've ever run any sort of queries or reports using like data, messages and trying to pull individual message information, and it may run a little slow, may have issues actually rendering. You might run into the same issues with Ping with some of that data. The good thing is there is a retention policy in place that you could put in for Ping and actually remove some of that data. But again, as we talk about that retroactive matching, you don't want to go too far back to delete. You want to make sure you're keeping some relevant data, as you go forward. So how do we query it? What do we get out of the information itself? Again, some ways to use it, and these are kind of low-hanging fruit, right? So if you talk about queries and say, what do we want to have for our admission counselors, and maybe we just run it for current user logged in where they access this query. Maybe you're looking at unsubmitted incomplete apps with app traffic or event landing page traffic, but they haven't actually signed up for an event. Using any of that information that you might get to say what motivates the student, how do we segment it? Are these students that are going to financial aid pages or study abroad pages? What can we kind of do in our communication plan to kind of build that out as well? And then the report side of it, where you get a lot more aggregate level of information, you can pull all of the website activity, the website traffic. You can actually use this obviously for communication campaigns to see what's working and what's working well. And then the digital ad conversion is obviously the big part of it that we'll go over a little bit in terms of how to actually report that. So there's a number of ways you can use the data. Again, it does take a little bit of legwork to kind of get that running and have an understanding of what you want to actually do with it. So this is just a very, very, very brief sample query of what you actually can get. For a counselor, you can show most recent login timestamp with that, as well as their first Ping timestamp, and then the total duration and how many logins. And so you get some information. You can combine it with other bases, other person scope, other app scope information, and get something that's a little more usable for a counselor. What do we get in the person scope data? So there's kind of two ways to pull the data. There's person scope data through the Slate template library, and then there's configurable joins, and that's kind of where we take it to overdrive a little bit. But initially, before configurable joins, we had a couple key informations. We had total count, so we could see how many times a student was going to any of our sites. First and last timestamp, which actually gives us some very good information about recent behavior for a student. Are these students, have they fallen off the cliff and really heard from them in a month or two or longer? Are they still engaged? Are they still active in our website and doing different things? And then obviously total duration, how long a student's been spending total time on our site, as well as specific URL variants. We can actually look at, I want to see that URL and see what website specifically has the most traffic. And so we get some good information from that, and we can use some of that pretty well. When we talk about configurable join Ping based, that's kind of where we really get into the meat of what we want to talk about today, is our obviously digital ad conversions, as well as additional tracking that we can then leverage. So now we get UTM information. So we get a whole set of UTM medium source content term, anything that we might already have in Slate, as well as any digital ad partners we might be working with. We do get an IP address as well here. We still get the URL, but we also get the refer URL. So we can see where a student has actually come from prior to that. And then we still get the timestamp and duration. So it's a bit of a different structure. You can still build a formula filter to grab a specific URL if you want. But again, now we have a little bit more we can work with, and we go a little bit more in depth with what we want to do. Just to kind of backtrack a little bit to make sure you have an understanding of the UTM side of things. UTM stands for Urchin Tracking Module, and it's essentially just that the variables assigned in links that if you've already done those in your delivery campaigns and you build those out automatically in Slate, or if you check any email you ever get from any marketing vendor or any company, there's probably UTM in those URLs. And so again, it's kind of putting in source or medium or term so that they can track what's working well, what links are succeeding, and which emails perform better than others. And so if you haven't done that, this is obviously an opportunity to kind of start looking at that in Slate. But any vendor you're working with from a digital ad should have these values, and they should be able to build them out and say, this is what our campaigns look like, and exactly what UTMs we're able to track. And so those do come over into Slate and into Ping, and in that configurable join base that we can actually pull them, whether you intend to or not, they will be there, which is really helpful. So we're going to talk about the digital ad conversion, because this is where I think it's most interesting as we talk about, how do we actually see the performance from digital ads as they come over to Slate, because those UTM hits will happen regardless, no matter what. So we can't control them. What I will say is that it gives us an opportunity to really do some significant changes to our origin sources and really make some discoveries that maybe we aren't typically tracking in Slate. And so I always talk about messing up origin sources a little bit and making some changes there. And so we'll do some of that as well as we talk about this. So this query, this is just a sample query that we'll kind of go over how to build. What this is it actually shows us first sources that are tied to digital ads. And so because of that retroactive matching that we talk about, even if a student, exist in Slate at a certain date. So that very first student technically existed in Slate. They were created on the 12th of December. They actually kind of had a ping hit 5 days before. So they actually had a Carnegie digital ad, and I'll use Carnegie as the example because it's easiest to pull for me. But they actually had a digital ad hit 5 days before. They were a stealth applicant. So when they actually went to the website and then decided they wanted to apply on the 12th and they created their application, they became a stealth applicant for their origin source. But we can see that's not actually their origin source, or that's not the origin source maybe it should be. And so we can make some changes and identify this list of students and see what we're actually working with here. So real quick, just to give you an idea of what it'll actually look like, this is basically the simple query. So all it is the UTM existence that we're going to pull. So we're going to do a subquery filter, and I will go through these step by step. A subquery filter for the existence of a specific UTM, either combination or just source. For simplicity, I just use Carnegie. And then we're going to put a subquery filter here using a comparison. And the comparison is going to pull the person created date and compare that to that same UTM source. So I want the initial first time UTM hit on any source, and it could be any UTM source, or again, a specific one you might be looking at. And then I just want to see, what does the date look like? Are we comparing and making sure that the person created is after that date? So it's very simple, and we're going to walk through the individual steps to go through that right here. So again, you're just going to put together, just to go back, it's a person scope query, and you're going to pull the UTM existence right here. And so it's a subquery filter. You're going to pull the Carnegie UTM exists, or again, it could be any UTM source, but for us, we'll use Carnegie. You're going to add a join at the bottom for pinks, and you're going to add UTM source, and you're going to grab whatever one you want for the source there. And again, it's just the existence. We just want to narrow it down and make it run a little bit better and say we just want anybody that has that. The next one is the big one, and this is the subquery filter that we're going to pull the first UTM timestamp in that comparison. So the first export we actually pull is that person created date. That's already in there. It's already existing, obviously, in the person database. So we're going to pull that. And then the next one that we're going to have is this UTM date. And that's a nested subquery export. So you're going to add a subquery export there. You're going to concatenate it. So you need to adjust it to concatenate. And then you're going to set the row limit to 1, which is very important because we only want 1 ping hit. So if we took everybody, it would be as many ping hits the row limits would actually break. So we just want that first one. And we're going to export out that ping timestamp. So again, we need to do a join. We need to filter off the Carnegie UTM because we only want those UTMs. And we're going to export out the timestamp itself. And then very important, we're also going to sort there by the ascending timestamp. So we want the earliest timestamp. Anything past that is going to be the second or third, or if they have 50 hits, it'll be additional. So basically from this, we're only just getting that one initial timestamp tied to that UTM data. And it gives us a number. So it'll actually give us a specific number once we have that comparison in there that'll actually show from this fall 2022 class. We actually have 88 students that existed in Slate as a ping hit before they existed as a person. And we still want to see it. So if we still want to pull the information, we'll grab it as an export. Same thing. It's just a subquery export. You're just pulling the timestamp, and you're only going to do a row limit of 1 with the ascending sort. And so it's going to work the exact same way. You'll end up seeing that. And then you end up getting this result. So you end up having a certain number of students there that existed as a digital ad hit before they existed as a person. But what do we want to do with that? Because right now we have all of these students we've identified and say, oh, their application is their first source, whether it's same day, a couple minutes, or a month or two, we have those records in there. And so even that third row is exactly the same time they hit the ad and then they submitted the application, or they started the application to exist. So what we want to do is actually create a digital ad interaction code. And it could be anything. So again, if you want to divide it up by all your vendors or have it be very generic and just say digital ad, and then you're going to have a corresponding origin source related to that interaction code. So you're basically doing the same thing. You're going to rebuild your origin sources a little bit and add a new origin source that just uses that interaction code. Then what you're going to do is you're going to take this export, this query, and export it out and reload it back into Slate. You could run it, in an SFTP loop, or just do it as a one-off. Once you load that with that timestamp, that Carnegie UTM timestamp, or whatever your UTM timestamp is, it will backdate that interaction code prior to their existence. And then when you obviously refresh those records and the origin sources happen, you'll end up having a number of students that end up changing their origin source to that digital ad instead of stealth applicants. So we can cut down on stealth apps. We can cut down on any other origin source that exists that we know technically happened after a digital ad. And so you can kind of set that up as much as you want. We did this for a number of schools. So we actually built this out for 4 schools that are very different. So, small private arts in California, large public in the Midwest, small public in the South, and a small private out West. And we kind of looked at those numbers of what we were actually seeing. The first school was the one we're kind of working with. They had 90 students total that fit this bucket of a ping hit from a digital ad before they existed. 30 of those students were stealth apps, and 13 deposits from the entire group, which is kind of significant. So again, we're cutting down on stealth apps and then knowing that we had 13 deposits that originated from a digital ad. That large public, a huge number, so 813 total students, 100 stealth apps, and then 181 total deposits from that group. So again, a large number that we're not necessarily tracking. Right now, it appears that they're only getting that information, they're doing a stealth app, they're applying, that's it. At this point, we do know where they came from. And so that's an important part of it. Again, it's one small piece of it, one small piece of the story to say, well, let's actually see how well digital ads are performing. We can use it in Slate. We can start with that. And now, this is an opportunity for I'm going to hand it over to Vivien, and she'll kind of go over the case study of Asia School Business and how they've used paying with some additional information tied to Google Analytics. And so I will pass it over to Vivien.
All right, thank you so much, Ted, for sharing that. So I'm going to share a little bit about the ASB case study, as Ted mentioned, and how we have been using ping data. So before even starting to work with ping data, you want to think about the objective. What are we trying to do with ping data, right? So the first objective is obviously, you want to use ping data to drive conversion. So you want to think about how you want to do that, right? So if you look on the left here, we've got a funnel. We've got all the different stages of student recruitment, interest, engagement, application, selection. So when you're using ping data, you want to think about driving prospective students from one stage of the funnel to the next stage, regardless of which stage they are in. And you want to convert, ultimately, you want to convert more prospective students to enrolled students. So with this in mind, you want to create an outline or a plan on how you want to use ping data. Right, just like how Ted mentioned earlier, ping data can be queried and reported on at the person level within the query tool, and we already know that. So how can we use that, right? So you want to think about the funnel stages that I mentioned earlier. You've got interest, engagement, and application. So for each stages of this, funnel stage, you want to think about how you want to segment prospects. So for example, at the interest stage, you want to use the query or ping data, which involves prospect status as well as website visitors. So for this, you can use the ping data. And then at the funnel stage, you want to think about of engagement. You want to think about using the inquiry status as well as the application portal visitors. So you can pull out the ping data for that as well. And then lastly, for the application stage, you want to think about using the applicant status. So essentially anybody who has started an application but have not yet submitted their application. So those are the ways that you can segment each of these different funnel stages. And then you want to think about the digital marketing activities that you want to use to drive them to take the next action, right? So in this case, in our case study, we've used automated email campaigns, we've used retargeting ads, and your digital marketing activities might be different, but regardless of which activity you use, you want to have similar objectives in mind. And what are those objectives and what are the CTAs that you want to use? So at the interest level, you want to think about moving them from the prospect status to an inquiry status. And this is how you can, you can see all of these statuses. You can query it on Slate, prospect, inquiry, applicant. So you want to move them from a prospect to an inquiry. And the way you can do that is you can get them to fill up any inquiry form and they will immediately have their statuses automatically changed from a prospect to an inquiry. And similarly, if they are at an inquiry status, how do you want to change them to an applicant? You want to get them to start an application. So that's the CTA that you will use. And then finally, if they've already started an application, you want to get them to submit an application. So obviously the CTA there would be to complete an application. So once you have kind of like outlined this plan, it will be so much more easier for you to start planning all the digital marketing activities that you want to start implementing to get them from one stage to another. So this is an example of how we set up, all of our plans or our digital marketing activities at the interest stage, and kind of like how we set up the queries and how we use the ping data as well. So at the interest stage, like I mentioned earlier, you want to pull out anyone who has visited the website, who have a prospect status, right? So here you can see the filters that we've used. You can filter by URL, you can filter by start date, you can filter by status. prospect status in this example. So in our case, right, the way we set up the query is we pulled anyone who have, visited the website in the last 6 months. You can do it, you can change this period and set it up as 2 months, 3 months, it's really up to you. So essentially anybody who has visited the website, throughout this year, starting from the 1st of January, this query will pull all of them. And then what I usually do is I sort them by total duration. So you can see the example in the middle here, the visual, where you can see them sorted out by total duration. And the highest duration that we're seeing here is more than 3,000 seconds. So essentially, this is what it pulls out. It pulls out anyone who's at the prospect status, who has visited the website and who have not filled up an inquiry form yet. And, it's very interesting to see that, there are some people who have spent, maybe 30 minutes on the website, but have not taken an action yet. So those are the people that you want to target. So how do you target them, right? One of the ways that you can do it through remarketing ads, like I mentioned. You can also do it through automated email campaigns. And this is an example of an automated email campaign that we set up for this segment. So we set up a schedule a call campaign. And what we did was we set up an automated campaign. We pulled anyone who has visited the website in the last 6 months, and they have spent at least 60 seconds on the website. So you can bring this down and you can, target anyone who has spent at least 30 seconds on the website as well. It's really up to you, but we've decided to go with 60 seconds. And essentially what this does is, as soon as you kind of like meet the criteria for this query, you will immediately get this automated email campaign encouraging you to fill up an inquiry form. In this case, it's for you to kind of like schedule a call with us or to download a brochure. And then once you've set that up, you want to track the conversions from the email campaigns, as well as, if you set up any digital campaigns, you want to track the conversions from that as well using your UTM sources. Right, and this is another example of what we've set up at the engagement and application and at the applicant stage, sorry. So what we've done is we've actually combined both of these stages because we decided to combine the CTAs as well. So in this case, for example, for the inquiry status, you can use and you can pull out anyone who has a status of inquiry. And if they have visited the application portal, right? So you pull all of them out using this query that I've kind of like put up here. So as long as they have visited the application portal in the last 6 months and they have not, submitted an application, it pulls all of them out. And in this case, or for this segment, I'm showing you an example of a remarketing ad that we had set up. So this is an ad that we had set up on LinkedIn. So this is a different topic, but we've decided to use LinkedIn, but because we feel that, for us, we see a lot more returns or ROI from LinkedIn campaigns. So we use very specifically, LinkedIn for remarketing campaigns. So this is an example, 2 examples of remarketing ads that we've set up. So as long as, what we do is we set up this query, we download the spreadsheet, and then we upload it to our LinkedIn remarketing campaign. We just upload the entire spreadsheet. And what it does is, as long as they're on LinkedIn, it will use their email address and, a few other data to kind of like, show this ad to them. And what this ad does is, the moment you click on it, it brings you back to the application portal. So you can continue your application and then ultimately submit it. You can also set up, like automated campaigns as well, in addition to the remarketing campaigns if you want. But these are some of the results that we've seen from a combination of the automated campaigns that we have sent out, as well as the digital marketing campaigns as well, the results that we've seen over a quarter earlier this year. So what we've seen is, the moment we started implementing ping data, we've been able to kind of like see better results in our digital marketing campaigns. So when we compared it, 3 months versus the same 3 months, last year, we saw 3 times more impact in terms of like Google search ads. We have also seen an increase in traction for all of our Slate emails, almost 300%. We have also seen 4 to 6 times more traction when it comes to Facebook and LinkedIn ads compared to the same period last year. And overall, we are seeing, stronger results when it comes to digital channels compared to the same period last year. But this could also mean, this is also because we have been tracking our ads a lot better. We've been using our UTM parameters in a more disciplined way, and we've also integrated ping data in a better way. We've been using ping data more effectively when it comes to our automated campaigns as well as our remarketing ads as well. So now, if you have done all of this and you want to think about external services, right, and how you want to integrate ping data with your external services, we want to talk a little bit about that as well. So how can you integrate or use the power of ping data in combination with Google Analytics, right? There's a way for you to use the two together. Obviously, there's a lot of pros and cons with ping analytics, but there's also strengths and weaknesses of Google Analytics. So you want to think of a way to kind of like bring these two different analytics together and use them and use the power of ping and Google Analytics together. So how can we do that? So before you even do anything, get started, you want to think about setting up your Slate ping tracking as well as your Google Analytics, the goals on Google Analytics, right? So what you need to do, Ted has also talked about this earlier, but you want to make sure that you want to implement ping on all your website pages, as well as your Slate pages, your portals and forms, because this is a different process. You want to make sure that all of your comps, especially the ones that are associated with your forms, are embedded with tracking scripts. You want to make sure that all of your ad campaigns have standardized UTM parameters. And the more disciplined you are with your UTM parameters, the better you are going to kind of like, you're going to track your sources a little bit better. So you want to make sure that you're as disciplined as possible with your UTM parameters. And once you've done that, you want to set up the relevant goals on Google Analytics. And then you want to also decide on the most appropriate type of Google Analytics goal. And I will talk a little bit about that in the next slide. So how do we set up all of the goals that I mentioned earlier? There are a few ways. So you want to think about setting up goals based on the funnel that I mentioned earlier. So your interest stage, your engagement stage, and your application stage. So on the left-hand side, it's an example of all the goals that you can potentially set up. There are so many different types of goals that you want to set up. So you want to pick the right goal. And then in terms of how you want to set up the goals, there are also different ways. For example, you can set up a goal each time someone lands on a website page. You can set up a goal each time somebody spends X amount of time on a website page, for example. And there are more than one way for you to set up a goal. And the way we have set it up, and these are just some examples of how we've set up goals, is, for example, at the interest stage, each time someone fills up an inquiry form and submit an inquiry form, that's counted as a goal, right? And then secondly, at the engagement stage, each time someone submits an event form, we consider that as a goal. And then thirdly, if someone has landed on an application portal, we also consider that as a goal. Right now, we are working on a way to kind of like create a goal every time someone starts an application. That means the moment they put in their login data, and we are setting that up. And the moment we have set that up, I think that will be a really great data point for us as well to use, in addition to the number of people who have landed on the application portal. So next, what else can you do with Google Analytics, right? So on Google Analytics, for all those of you who are familiar and you have been using Google Analytics for some time, you would know about the goal flow report feature. And the great thing about the goal flow report is it shows the path your traffic traveled through a funnel towards a goal conversion. So you will be able to see if your users are navigating your content as expected, if there are any problems such as like high drop-off rates or unexpected loops. And I'll show you an example of how we figured that out using goal flow report, or how we were able to see some of these data points. But what else can you do with the goal flow report? You can see where users enter your funnel at the first step, or are they jumping somewhere in the middle? And you can see if there are a lot of unexpected exits from a step in the middle of the funnel. You can also see if there's a place where traffic loops back. And you can also see and detect if there's one segment of traffic that acts differently than other segments. And you can also see if it's converting more or less often as well. So this is an example of how we've been able to see some of this data. So using the Google Analytics goal flow report, we have been able to also use the reverse goal path feature. So the way we use this is we've been able to track the most common previous page goal paths. That means all the previous pages that someone or a prospect has kind of like visited before, reaching a goal. So what this does is you can actually see which pages sent the most conversions. So in this example here, in this visual here, you can see that the high value pages or the pages that are driving the most conversions for us or are the pages where we're seeing the most conversions are coming from the MBA program page as well as the MBA admissions page. And you can see that in the example here. And then in terms of the ad, we can see that the Google ads, especially the remarketing ads, are the ones that are also driving conversions as well. So these are some of the data that you can see using your Google Analytics goal flow report. And what else can you see? So this is an example of a download brochure landing page that I mentioned earlier. So what are some of our visitors, what are some of the pages that our visitors are seeing before they land on that page? You can see that here. For example, you can use the source or medium filter and you can see what are some of your top traffic sources. In our case, we saw that our top traffic sources are organic sources that are coming from Google, followed by the website. And then the third one is our Slate email campaigns as well. And then you can see the other sources as well. So we know for a fact that these are the sources and the medium, right, that are driving the most number of traffic or is, allowing most of the conversions to happen. But we also noticed some issues, right, through this report, and you can see that the funnel exits, right? You can see that there's a 70% drop-off rate, and then there's a 2.3% loop back to the same page. So I think these are some of the things that, or some of the data points that you can use to kind of like improve your landing page. Essentially, or ideally what you want to do is you want to get visitors to kind of like stay on your website page. So a 70% exit rate is considered pretty high. So the moment we saw this, we obviously went back to our landing page. We looked at the UX experience of our entire landing page, and we're in the midst of, revamping that entire page as well. And then we used additional services for such as like, heat maps and things like that, just to determine if there are any issues with our landing pages. And then just making sure that we have, relevant links included in the landing page so that there's, the moment they have submitted the form, they can visit any other website pages. Essentially, we want to get them to stay as long as possible on the website page, and we want to reduce the exit, the drop-off rate. Now, how can we use the power of Power BI visualization when it comes to ping data? So if you have set up your ping data, you have set up your Google Analytics, and then you're thinking about what's next, you can definitely tap into the power of Power BI as well. And what Power BI has done for us is, or what we have done on Power BI is that we have managed to use Slate data and we've managed to integrate that with Power BI in real time. And the way we have done this is, the first step is to set up your ping configurable joins, and talked about this earlier. You want to add your ping duration, your ping referrer, any other data points that you feel is important. In our case, we've added ping UTM sources, ping URL, as well as all of the UTM codes. And once you have set this up, you can then integrate it real time with Power BI. You can use the JSON service, web service, to pull in data in real time. And the moment you do this, you can export all of this data to Power BI for a full funnel review. So this is the way we see all of our data on Power BI. The video is not running right now, but essentially what you can do is you can click on any one of these data points. For example, if you click on UTM campaign, you can see the associated UTM content, the associated term, ping referrer, and ping URL, and then you can see what are kind of like your top campaigns, what are driving, what are your sources that are driving the highest ROI. But the great thing about Power BI is you can also kind of like see it on a year by year basis as well, which is really great. And in the next slide, these are some of the Power BI reports that we have set up as well. One for the website data, one for the events data, and we're able to see it filter it based on program, based on status, based on application cycle. And then for events, especially, we are also able to filter it by registration and attendance statuses. So it just makes it really easy for you to compare year-on-year data for all of the different ping data that you have, for all of the different queries that you have built. And same with the application page. You can also again filter based on program, status, and application cycle. Here you can see that we've pulled up all of the data from 2019. And then you can add in your ping duration count, unique count, average duration, and then you can also compare year by year data and do a lot more. So I think, in a gist, once you have set up your ping data and your Google Analytics, you want to think about using a visualization tool. In our case, we've used Power BI, but you can also consider using Google Data Studio, or you can use a combination of the two. It's really up to you, but really just helps take your kind of like your ping data to the next level. So I hope this is helpful, and I'll pass it back to Ted. If there's anything, he has anything else to add, but I think that's the end of our presentation for today.
That is it. Thank you, everybody. If anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to both Vivien or myself as well.